Marco was a simple and honest man in his 40s. He was a gardener, a job he loved, but which always kept him at a distance from the inhabitants of the luxurious villas where he worked. The last one was that of the Rossi family, an imposing villa, surrounded by a magnificent garden that Marco had taken care of with dedication. But fate had played a nasty trick on him. He had been accused of theft, a crime he had not committed. Before continuing, subscribe to our channel and activate the bell. As he walked home, Marco's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The weight of injustice was crushing him. His only fault had been being in the wrong place at the wrong time, but the fear of telling the truth tormented him. The consequences could have been devastating. As soon as he crossed the threshold of the house, a car stopped in front of him. It was Elisa, the owner of the villa. With her long, messy black hair and her eyes red from crying, she seemed as destroyed as he was. "Marco, why did you do it?" she asked with a trembling voice, her gaze full of pain. Despite the accusations, there was a note of confidence in her words, as if she still hoped for an explanation. Elisa was a reserved woman, no longer young, but with a melancholic beauty that made her fascinating. She lived in the villa with her son Andrea, a rebellious and problematic teenager. Marco had always noticed the tension that hovered between the walls of that house. From the first day of work, he had sensed that something was wrong. He remembered that first day well. He arrived early, eager to begin. The garden of the villa was immense, full of blooming roses and perfectly manicured hedges. As he worked, he discreetly observed the life that flowed inside the house. Elisa rarely went out, while Andrea seemed to spend his days on his own, often in the company of questionable friends. The servants spoke in low voices, but Marco could not help but hear fragments of conversations, which concerned the difficult family situation. One day, while he was trimming the hedges, he heard two maids arguing. "Elisa hasn't had an easy life since her husband left her," one said. "Andrea has changed a lot since he left," the other replied with a sigh. Marco, while trying not to show interest, was struck by the words of the two women. He understood that Elisa carried a great weight on her shoulders. As the weeks passed, Elisa and Marco began to talk. Their conversations began as simple exchanges about the garden. She praised Marco's work, appreciating the care he took in caring for the plants. But soon, those light conversations became more profound. "I feel suffocated here," Elisa confessed one day, looking at the roses Marco was carefully pruning. "This villa has become a cage for me." Marco, ever attentive, answered her wisely. "I understand, ma'am. Sometimes the most beautiful places can make us feel small and lost." Those words struck Elisa deeply. She began to confide in him, telling how, after her husband had abandoned her for a younger woman, she had found herself raising Andrea alone. The boy had become increasingly distant, rebellious, and difficult to manage. He spent less and less time at home, preferring the company of less respectable boys. Marco had noticed Andrea's behavior from the beginning. He often saw him sneaking out, jumping over the back wall of the property to meet up with his friends. Although his work kept him busy, he couldn't help but worry about the young man. One day, he decided to confront him. "Andrea, your mother has suffered enough already. Don't give her any more grief." The boy, while showing a vague sympathy for Marco, continued with his rebellious attitude, ignoring the gardener's advice. The situation was getting worse day by day. Then, one afternoon, something happened that changed everything. As Marco was about to finish his shift and get ready to go home, he saw Andrea climbing over the wall as he often did. But this time, something fell out of the boy's pocket. Marco approached and picked up a small box. Inside were jewels which he immediately assumed belonged to Elisa. Andrea, realizing he had lost the box, went back. "Give me that box," he ordered arrogantly. But Marco did not move. "I can't let you do this, Andrea," he said firmly. The boy, furious, began to scream, attracting everyone's attention. Within minutes, Elisa and the staff rushed over, finding Marco with the box in his hand. "I saw him steal your jewelry, Mom," Andrea accused, his face distorted with anger. Elisa looked shocked. She knew Marco was an honest man, but the situation was ambiguous and overwhelming. Marco, without wanting to hurt Elisa or completely destroy the fragile relationship between mother and son, did not know how to defend himself. With a heavy heart, he decided to leave. He left the villa, knowing that his reputation had been tarnished. But as he prepared to accept his fate, Elisa arrived at his house. With tears in her eyes, she asked him, "Tell me the truth, Marco. Was it really Andrea?" Marco reluctantly told everything. Elisa, shocked, collapsed in his arms, sobbing. "Where did I go wrong with Andrea?" she asked desperately. Marco, trying to console her, stroked her hair. "It's not your fault," he whispered softly. "Sometimes life tests us, but there's always a chance to change." In the days that followed, Elisa made a brave decision. She sold the villa and bought a small farm in the countryside, a place where she hoped to start over with Andrea. The change was not easy, but Marco kept his promise and continued to help her. Together, they worked the land, planted trees, and cared for the olive trees. Over time, Andrea also began to change. Working in contact with nature helped him find himself again. A year later, the farm was already known for its genuine products. Marco and Elisa, in the meantime, became closer and closer until their relationship turned into something deeper. One afternoon, as they watched the sunset together, Elisa turned to Marco and smiled. "You were right, Marco. Sometimes, to find ourselves, we have to leave everything behind." He smiled back. "And sometimes, we have to lose something to find something much more precious." In that moment, Elisa knew she had finally found her place in the world. No longer a prisoner of a life that didn't belong to her, she was free to be herself, next to the man she loved, and with a son who had found his way again. Their story is a reminder that true happiness is not found in material goods, but in the relationships we cultivate and the simplicity of the life we choose to live. Did you like this story? Leave a comment below. Thanks for watching the video till the end, and see you next story.